Good evening, everybody. I am Monty J. Wolf, and on behalf of Brave Soul Collective, we are grateful to have you back with us for Act 2 of Black Men Feel. We just want to go down the list and let you know some of these things we're going to be talking about for this Act 2, which is we've entitled Wounds. Some of this stuff is a little heavy, but I think this conversation that we have with our panelists is going to be educating, it's going to be enlightening, and hopefully it will be inspiring because we have some great panelists, we have some great perspectives, and we just want to run down this list very quickly to just tell you about some of the things you're going to hear us talk about tonight. And before I dive into that, I want to just preface all of this by saying that because of this moment in time that we find ourselves in with 2020 and this pandemic, all the things we're getting ready to run down this list of, all of these things fall under the umbrella of COVID-19 in terms of how we're having to deal with all of this. I mean, all of the things we're going to mention are things that were things long before March 2020. But from March up until now, we found that all of this stuff is just magnified, if anything. So first thing we're going to dive into is a discussion about depression and loneliness and suicide, because unfortunately, something that a lot of people experience and kind of suffer from. And with just the ways that a lot of people have experienced challenges around isolation and not being able to socialize or be around their families or their friends, is something that is more present for everybody right now in this moment. From there, we're going to segue into a conversation about loss and grief. And again, sadly, because of where we find ourselves this year, that is something that's very present for all of us across the world in terms of the number of people we have lost. But what we really want to dive into is a conversation about how we deal with grief, how it shows up, how we move through it, and how we find our ways to just kind of navigate our ways through the complicated pieces of it. After that, we're going to dive into talking about some of the vices and coping mechanisms in terms of the things that we use, whether they be things that we feel like are benefiting us or whether we feel like they're things that may kind of hinder us. We're going to talk about some of the vices and things that we use to cope to get through shit, because some of this stuff is just very, very difficult and very challenging. So you'll find us talking about substance abuse, about sex, about food, but we'll also be talking about just ways that we get through, whether it's meditation or music or some of those other kinds of things like working out. From there, we're going to dive into a very unique conversation about HIV and AIDS and disclosure, because again, that is something that for the last at least 30, 35 years has been something that has been very present for a lot of us, for all of those people who either work in the field or are living with HIV or are affected by HIV and AIDS. And the conversations around disclosure and, you know, if you tell someone, how you tell them, how you discuss these things with sex partners, with your family, and all of those kinds of things. It's just very complicated. And sadly, because of COVID-19, that gets even more complicated this year. So that's some of what we're going to dive into. And when we come back, you'll get a chance to meet our panelists, and then we're going to dive into this conversation. So we just ask you to stick with us briefly, and we'll be back on the flip side to dive into Act 2, Wounds, okay? So we'll be back momentarily.
Now we are workers and fighters, heroes loud without any noise. And we've got work to do so everyone can feel this black boy joy. So take my hand, little brother, take my hand, proud father.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. So we are back with my four amazing panelists, and I just want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. We have some similar faces, and then we also have a new face, so I want to let everybody introduce themselves, and then we can dive right into this conversation. So why don't we let the newbie on the block introduce himself first. Mr. Mark Tuggle, you want to go? Tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name is Mark Tuggle. I live in the village of Harlem, New York City. I'm an activist, I'm an educator, I'm a blogger and a writer and a mentor, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, welcome. We are glad to have you, and we look forward to hearing your insight on some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. And next we have Daniel. You want to go?
Sure. Good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Downer, he, him, his, with the Bros and Convo Initiative based in Orlando, Florida. And I'm excited to be here with all of you beautiful souls again.
We are excited to have you back. Thank you, Daniel. Up next, we have Mr. Daddy Rod. Take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm Daddy Rod, based here in the Atlanta area. I am a proud Leatherman, I'm a leather BDSM sex educator, sex worker advocate, proud member of Onyx, entrepreneur. I do it all.
Well, we are glad to have you back for this conversation. And last, certainly not least, David, you're up.
All right, hey everybody, David Malbranch. I'm an internal medicine physician, writer, sexual health, HIV doc, an advocate, an activist, he, him, his, and just honored to be here as a part of this collective with all these wonderful people.
All right, thank you. And again, I just want to publicly thank you all for taking time out of your day or your evening to be here and share this conversation and this dialogue with me. I know some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight is pretty heavy, but I feel like, you know, I have the right group of people that will give us some insight and just speak from the heart. That's really all we want tonight, is people to be able to be honest and just share their insight and speak their truth. So with that, as I shared before we brought in the panelists, we have some things we're going to be talking about and going down the list. But most importantly, out of all of those things that I mentioned, the one that's in the forefront of everybody's mind and why we're having to do all these things in this manner is COVID-19. I mean, it's something that I don't think any of us saw coming. Any of us could have prepared for, given the ways that, you know, we were kind of set up by, you know, the way this whole thing panned out. But, you know, here we are, you know, months later. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we're going to be talking about tonight that were in existence and that we might have been affected by before COVID-19. But I think under the guise of COVID-19, it just complicates things way more. And that's kind of where we want to start. So first, we want to dive into a conversation about some things around depression and loneliness and, you know, feelings of suicide or just isolation and some of those things that a lot of people experience. Like I said, that's something that I don't think any of us are foreign to. I think, you know, we all may have had run-ins or experiences where we might have been down or experienced some kind of situational depression or something that might have been more serious. But this year, the ways in which all of those things are landing are just, it's just kind of changed the game. So that's really what I want to kind of dive into. So I will let you gentlemen take it away from there. And if anybody has anything that they'd like to share in terms of what kind of what you feel like comes up for you, or, you know, what, you know, how you find yourself moving through those experiences when you experience feelings of loneliness or depression or anything like that. Anybody have any insight?
Well, I'll start. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression in February of '95. You know, I have a mental illness. I don't take medication. And, you know, living with mental illness has led to some other unpleasant feelings, some other unresolved issues, some other unwelcome memories. And, you know, I've had some moments, you know, a few years ago, I had some random thoughts of suicide. And the thoughts would come, the thoughts would go. And I didn't tell anybody. This went on for a few months. I didn't have any plans to do anything, but I still had these thoughts. And I was afraid to admit it, and I was ashamed of being afraid. And so I held on to those secrets, you know, secrets clutter the spirit. But eventually I found the courage to share with a trusted friend, an older male. And he basically said that there may be an area of your life in which you are unhappy with, and there may be something you need to work on. And that's pretty much all he said. And, you know, oddly enough, that's what I needed to hear. Because you know, a few years ago, I was feeling unfulfilled professionally. You know, I have all this creative talent, but it's not seeming to lead to any type of fruition. You know, the world doesn't know who I am. So sometimes I feel invisible as an artist. I feel unappreciated. I feel misunderstood. So that was 3 years ago, and my life is a lot different since, but I'm glad that I found the courage to tell somebody what I was going through. I actually started crying, and I don't feel safe crying in public. And particularly with another man. I've never had that type of intimacy in my life. So for some reason, for that moment, I was able to get vulnerable, and he was there for me in a way that wasn't authoritative. He didn't try to recruit me religiously, and he didn't try to impose his beliefs on me. And He didn't tell me to man up or, you know, you're soft, you're pussy, you're weak, you know. He didn't tell me to just, you know, let it go, whatever. He was just present. And sometimes I just need the presence of a human being. You don't have to say nothing. You don't have to do nothing. I just need your compassion, your empathy, your kindness. Just let me share. Don't try to fix me, you know. And, you know, so I haven't had those thoughts since then, but it wasn't the first time I've had those thoughts. So depression, loneliness, suicide are part of the same family, you know, and when they come, I either have to write about it or talk about it or pray about it, and not in that order.
Right. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it's funny, as you started speaking about the fact that you didn't feel comfortable crying, the first place my mind went was asking you what you felt led to it, but you went right into it, which I think is important. It's important to point that out. I mean, you weren't with us when we did the first conversation back in September last month, but that was where, you know, we were kind of talking about, you know, where we learn all of this shit, you know, where we're taught, like you said, all of those tropes and these things about, well, don't be a pussy, and, you know, showing crying or, you know, showing a sign of weakness and all this other kind of stuff or what have you. So it was interesting to hear you talk about the things that were markedly different that kind of made you feel safe enough to do that, because that's a huge part of what's important, is to give people, particularly us as Black men, whether you're queer or not, but especially for us as, you know, black men who identify as queer or what have you, that we're given the time and the space to just be able to be a fucking human being without being picked apart or being made to feel crazy, you know, to be being made to feel like we're crazy or we're overreacting or anything like that. So I definitely appreciate you sharing all of that. Anybody else want to chime in on this and talk about, you know, what happens for you when you experience a disconnect or how you find yourself in those tight spots?
Sure, I don't mind sharing. I think for me, the first thing is being brave enough, being transparent enough, and being vulnerable enough to put a name to those feelings, which I know is extremely hard for me, because I think growing up as a Black man, a lot of times we're not necessarily encouraged to name how we feel, or those emotions. And so for me, that's kind of the first step, is really being open and honest about how I'm feeling in that moment when I'm not feeling my best. Like right now, I'm not okay. Like feeling brave enough to say that, or today is just not, you know, it's one of those days, right? And not trying to minimize it by just like, oh, it's okay. Like I'm gonna get through it. So for me, it's like first acknowledging that, and then in some way sitting in those feelings and trying to figure out, okay, what was my trigger, or like what really like caused me to feel this way. And then really from there think about like, how can I resolve or reconcile those feelings, whether that's I need to like talk to my therapist, which is amazing, or whether I need to just like sit in meditation or go for a walk or do some type of activity to, you know, to lift my spirits. And then also for me, it's being vulnerable and transparent enough when I share that with my support system and my network, to allow them to be a part of like that reconciliation process and not feel like it's something that I have to do on my own. And so really like being cognizant, and willing and accepting of the help that friends or family or partners or lovers are wanting to offer me in that moment, and understanding like they are part of this journey as well, and allowing them to be in whatever capacity they're able to or willing to offer themselves to be.
Absolutely. That's real. Thank you, Daniel. Daddy Rod, you got anything you want to share?
You're gonna put me on the spot, I see.
Yes.
For me, depression started probably around 6 or 7 years old, mainly because as a child I was called ugly a lot, so I felt that I was ugly.
Hmm.
And this went, and it was never about the gay thing, because I guess being raised in California, y'all, we were carefree people, most of us were. And so the gayness wasn't an issue. But, you know, being called ugly repeatedly by mainly other black kids from like, when you're 6, you were what, fifth, or you were in like first, second grade, I think, all the way through high school. You know, you hear this, so you begin to believe it. So it affected me in a way to where I just kind of went within, and and I've never really talked about it with my parents. It's not because I couldn't talk to them about it, because actually they encouraged that. They said, let us know how you feeling, blah, blah, blah. But I guess I didn't want to appear weak and vulnerable like that to them. So I just try to forget about it and not try to burden them with my problems. I just focused all of my schoolwork. It was about school, school, school. And then at the time I was in track and everything else. So, you know, this feeling of me feeling, you know, inferior and ugly and stuff came to a head with my first suicide attempt back in college, where I overdosed on pills. Well, almost overdosed on pills. And to this day, my parents didn't even know about it. So if they watch this, they're going to be like, oh my God.
Mm.
But, and even then, I still didn't seek help because I was at school in Alabama. This was back in the early 90s. So, and then, you know, Alabama, gay, black, trying to talk to someone, that was just kind of hard.
Right.
So, and I really didn't have anyone to talk to in college, because I think we all know that you always have the cliquish groups, the in crowds or whatever. And I was never in that, because I was constantly in my studies. At that time, I was a double engineering major, so my head was to the books. So, you know, I was a loner, and I just felt like I really didn't know how to talk to anybody. And then a few gay people who I knew at Tuskegee, they were the popular ones, and they would meet all these people and they get drunk and fuck and all that other shit. And I wasn't all about that life. So I was by myself. So I got over through that, graduated, moved back to California, then eventually to New York. But I was still dealing with that depression, you know, a lot. And it came to a head again back in the mid 2000s, right around the time of the financial collapse, right when Obama was about to be elected. I lost my job. I was taking care of my ailing grandparents. I just was like, I felt like everything was just coming down on me. So I just felt like I'm just going to end it. So I stopped taking my HIV medication. So for like a few years, I didn't take it. So it was like a slow death. And I didn't mind, you know, because I felt at that time, that maybe I didn't have anything else to offer anybody or the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know what, if I die, I die. And the only thing that kind of kept me or got me back to getting back on my medication and everything like that was I thought about my parents, especially my mother. And I remember we had a discussion when she kind of knew something was off. And she's like, are you okay? And I was like, I'm okay. She's like, you know, she kind of told me, she's like, I need you. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she didn't really go into detail, but the few people who know me know I love my family dearly, and I'll do anything for my family. So, and I found out later on through my sister, she's like, you're kind of like the glue in both of our sides of the family, my mom's side and my dad's side. And, you know, you keep everybody connected. Everyone loves to be around you. And I felt like, well, maybe that's a good enough reason to live. Because if no one else doesn't want me because I'm ugly or I don't have the right job, I don't have the right clothes, I don't have this, at least I have my family to fall back on. So, and then that's the first time I actually saw a therapist, and really just had to deal deep in within, like, what was the problem here? And it goes back to my childhood stuff issues. And I will admit, I still go through it at times. I will say I'm not suicidal anymore, but I do have my moments. But I just, right now, but I realized with the 2 failed attempts, I realized also just through meditation and actually being a little bit open with my parents about how I feel, that God does have a purpose for me, and I had to really look within and just meditate a lot. So like people always wonder why I always go to the gym. The gym is literally like my therapy for me to meditate, get into tune with my body, my soul, my spirit, and get back to doing things that bring joy into my life, which would be community service or helping friends who might be struggling through things or stuff like that. So that brings me joy in my life. So even if I will admit sometimes I'm not really totally feeling joy in my life, at least I feel joy helping other people, if that makes sense. And so I will admit it's still an ongoing struggle, but I'm better. And I have a few people I can talk to. Even still, I don't really feel comfortable telling a lot of people because I think a lot of people don't care, to be honest with you. Because other people have other issues going on. And I feel like I don't want to burden people. So I just kind of take it within. And so, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing it. I mean, thank you. And thank all of you for just being willing enough and being open enough to be that vulnerable and just share these pieces of your story. Because again, I know that this is not easy and kind of opening yourself up and telling your business. But I feel like this is, us sharing with a purpose, because I think this is the way that even just all of us, I mean, we all know each other, but there are things that we're finding out about each other's stories that I feel like is just kind of like bonding us even more in terms of knowing like how we got to where we are, you know what I'm saying? And why we are the ways that we are. And I think that kind of better helps us to be able to just check in with each other and be able to support each other and be like, okay, you all right? I don't want anything. And I've done that several times during this, yes, I might be texting y'all about, we got a panel recording, we got this, I need your bio, but sometimes I'm just like, are you okay? As busy as I get, people do it with me. And I feel like that's a part of this as well, is like just checking in with people, making sure that, even if it's in that moment.
Well, I agree, because I don't know for you, but that brings some kind of joy in my life to make sure that my people who I care about are okay, even if I'm not okay.
Right.
Because if they come back, even if they say, oh, I'm not in the best of spirits, I always let them know I'm here if you need to talk. And I feel like at least I'm doing what I think we should all be doing, is checking on each other, especially now.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Rodney. And David, did you have anything that you wanted to share about this? And I have a question that I want to pose to each of you around this that came up, but I want to let David share or speak on this if he'd like to.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things onto what Rodney said, and also what Mark said earlier. And I'm close with Rodney, and we've talked about this stuff before. And I was telling him, like, it's so true, how you get fulfillment out of nurturing or helping other people. And I told Rodney sometimes, and I meant this as a compliment, his spirit reminds me of my mother a lot of times, because that's where she gets her fulfillment from and her sense of purpose. And so, she's always giving to other people. And I think that's a good thing if you can get some satisfaction, like, okay, I have a role on this earth. This is what, feeds me. This is what gives me purpose. And this is what gives me esteem. I think the only drawback sometimes with that, and I've seen this with my mom, is that sometimes you overly focus on pleasing everybody else and nurturing everyone else, and you don't fill up your own cup. Right. And so that can have a two sides things to it. I think, for me, depression was never really always that, I'm really feeling down. I'm crying all the time. I'm sitting like Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, when I couldn't get with Michael Douglas's character, and I'm flipping the light on and off while I'm like, people think that that's what depression looks like, and it doesn't. And depression can look as simple as like, you just really start to withdraw, or your mood changes a little bit, or you're sleeping too much or too little sometimes, or you just aren't finding joy in the things you usually do. It doesn't always have to fit a clinical diagnosis. And I can pinpoint different times in my life for various reasons, whether it's, I felt under the pressure of, my father's expectations that I kind of withdrew and went into myself, or I just kind of had overstretched myself and, started to feel down. Or even now, like, I'm in the throes of like grieving for my father who passed earlier this year. And sometimes I'll be up till 4 or 5 in the morning, and I've experienced some loss this year as well. So I'm just kind of, it's not the same. It may not be obvious. And of course I can put on a good face, and when I'm in front of other people, like Rodney said, I don't want to get people down. You're not always trying to burden other people with your problems. And I think that's the hardest part about right now in this moment with COVID-19 is that we're all going through a lot of shit. And then it's like racism has an acute on chronic exacerbation and is finding its footing in new and crazier ways. And then COVID-19 is happening. And so all of us are really under the gun. And that's just the baseline foundation before we start adding our personal shit on top of it. So it's really overwhelming. And then I just assume right now that everybody is going through something. I don't care how you manifest it or how you show it externally. I think one of the lessons I've learned from this is that it doesn't just have to be COVID-19 for us to realize this, but people are going through shit all the time, no matter what they tell you, no matter the smile on their face or how they look or how gregarious or outward appearing they are. All of us are going through stuff. So it's always a good idea to check in on people and, you know, see how they're doing. I want to say one thing before we move on about what Mark was saying when he was talking about just having a person there. Sometimes that is helpful. And I as Mark, as you were talking, and I know Rodney knows this song. I don't know if everyone else on the panel does, but Keena, who used to sing with Brownstone, she was the replacement member for Brownstone's second album. She came out with a solo album right before Jill Scott did, about 21, 22 years ago. And she had a song called Have a Cry. And one of the lyrics was, "Don't come here to preach. Don't need no goddamn happy speech. Is it okay if I cry?" And she was just trying to say, like, look, just let me cry. Let me get it out. I don't need you to lift me up and say all these happy platitudes like it's going to be okay or this, that, and the other. Just let me have my moment. And I think when Mark was talking, I really thought about that song because I absolutely love that song. And it's so true that sometimes if a person's just there, they're worried about saying the right thing or doing the right thing or here, can I do this for you? Can I take you out? Let's go do this. Let's forget about this. And it's like, no, you could just sit there while a person is crying their eyes out and not say a word, and that be the most comforting thing to that person who's crying, just to know that that other person is there. So I just, you know, when I think about depression, anxiety, and how we all go through stuff, sometimes it is those simple things, and you think you have to do all this extra, but it's not always the case.
Wow. Well, David, again, thank you for offering all of that up. And it's funny. It's almost like, you know, I do feel there's a bit of synergy with all of us because you kind of bled right into what I was going to point out, because I know we've talked about this before, but I think the most important thing, I had to do this today when I was talking to a friend, and I had to learn how to state this very clearly with other people for the reasons you just said. When somebody's in crisis, I'm somebody that can easily, like you said, I can sit with you if you're crying or if you're uncomfortable. I've had exes and other people who literally said to me, well, I didn't know what to do because it made me uncomfortable and I couldn't make you feel better. And I'm like, all I need you to do is just sit here. Like, let me know that I'm not alone. Like, don't treat me like a rabid dog because I'm already feeling, you know, some kind of way. And there's not anything that you could say to me that's going to make me feel worse than what's going on in my head. And if anything, I need to be pulled out of that. And, you know, what I've had to learn how to do when somebody else is in crisis, because what I feel like I don't get from other people, is to stop and ask them, what do you need from me? That's it. Like, you tell me, what do you need? Do you want me to listen? Do you want me to just, you know, do you want to, like you said, if you kind of use that as a gauge, then it makes it easier for people to feel safe enough to be able to come to you and talk to you. Because my other question was going to be, and I'm going to throw this at you all, and I'd love for this to kind of be like what we wrap up with at the end, because I think that this kind of expands past depression and loneliness and suicide. But how do you navigate letting people in? And I think, you know, that's a question that encompasses all of what we're talking about, what we talked about last month, what we're talking about now, and definitely what we're going to round out with in December when we're talking about healing. Because it's like, okay, when we're talking about Black men, and particularly us as Black queer men, and talking about our feelings, how do we navigate the times in which we let somebody in, when we feel safe, when we feel comfortable, like Mark said, when we feel like, okay, there's somebody who's not, you know, coming at me with all of this other bullshit that makes me feel like I got to clam up. Or David, like you said, you know, how do I kind of gauge what somebody needs and instead of trying to come up with a diversion. It's like, well, let's go out, let's drink. No, can we just sit in this moment for a minute? Can you just let me be miserable for a moment? And nobody wants to, like enhance, being a Debbie Downer, but it's like, sometimes you got to be able to find the right person that
I think it's a trust issue, I think sometimes. And sometimes you have to like put a feeler out there, because I think everyone on this panel probably has that friend that is self-centered and makes everything about themselves. And there's a difference between being selfish and self-centered. I consider selfish, you put yourself first. And we all have to be selfish at some time, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Self-centered means you make everything about you. And so there's that friend that you'd be like, I'm really depressed. I'd give you an example for my father just died. Well, my father died 3 years ago, and and then all of a sudden they go off on a tangent, and all of a sudden it's about their grieving with their father. And it's not necessarily, well, oh my God, tell me about that. Talk to me a little bit about it. How close were you to him? What's going on? And so they automatically make it about them. And I don't think the intentions are always bad with that.
Right.
Sometimes people are trying to connect with you and say, hey, I understand exactly what you're going through. But unintentionally, sometimes it can skirt it. And instead of keeping the focus on the person who's really going through what they're going through, it can kind of become convoluted. So what I like to do is I'll put something out there like that. And if the friend kind of just takes it and runs with it and goes their own way with it, I'm like, well, okay, that's obviously not our relationship. So let me just hold off on that. And then there are going to be other person. Just realize that not everybody can absorb the emotional weight of when you're feeling depressed or down. And that's not their fault. And it's not a bad thing. So I wouldn't judge anybody who can't handle that. I would just say, well, maybe it's not the right time, or maybe that's not the right energy, or maybe that's not the roles that we have played in our interaction with each other. And so I just have to go to someone that's a little bit, that's different, or maybe can handle this right now. And that can be fluid. A friend that, used to be able to talk to years ago and, be able to dump some of your shit on at time, and they would have absorbed it. Now some things have changed and maybe they can't. So it varies, but I think it's almost like a testing process to see what you can do and then go from there.
Absolutely. And I thank you, David. I think that you're absolutely right, because I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps us from, I heard I don't even remember who it was. I think, Rodney, you said it. It's that, oh, I don't want to burden anybody. I've heard that 1,000,001 times. And the thing that like terrifies me, because I felt that way. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I get more unhelpful advice and feedback from people. If, like you said, if I reach out to the wrong people, I had to learn that the hard way. And when you're already in crisis, something like that can just tip the scale and make the shit 10 times worse. So sometimes I do just kind of sit in it myself, but I've had to learn, baby, sometimes you gotta send out that, like Daniel said, those 3 words, I'm not okay. And sometimes something like that can tip the scale and make a difference. But just, because I think a lot of this is very similar, and we'll double back to that question.
Can I elaborate a little bit on what David said? And that
Sure.
is very true, that I would think you kind of have a core group of friends, and you kind of know who you can go to when you need to talk about grief. Mm-hmm. Or you need someone just like kind of pick you up, because some people truly have that comforting, nurturing spirit, mm-hmm. and they don't make it about themselves. And like he elaborated earlier, like, sometimes you don't have to talk, just being there, holding his hand, hugging him, and that's it. And for me, I'm big on comfort food. So if you want a cake or a cobbler, I'll make you one of those. And, but it's knowing who you could talk to, because as I've been here in Atlanta now 20 years, and as David said, there's some people who I used to be able to talk to about certain things. And now, as they say, some people are in your life for a season, and sometimes that season might be over. And it could be nothing bad happened. It's just we all grow in different ways, and we just kind of part, and nothing bad happened.
Right. And
your circle gets smaller. So then you got to really pray for discretion, because then you be like, who can I really talk to? You know what I'm saying? And then again, me going on the spiritual realm, this is when I said, you know what? Let me talk to the universe and let him guide me the right way. And that's been, outside my mama, that has been very helpful.
No, I agree with you, Daddy Rod, and I think I appreciate you bringing that up, because I'm a firm believer that we always get what we need when we need it, even though it's sometimes I had to learn it does not always come from that person that I thought it was supposed to come from or that it should come from, but I always get what I need. And sometimes that's, like you said, spirit or, you know, my own intuition leading me back to myself.
And honestly, to finish up, I don't want to take your time. When situations like this happen, and let's say for someone who you were used to able to talk to, and now you're not, then you got to say in your mind, okay, are we still cool as friends, or are we really separating? How should we separate? In the sense of maybe our time is up, and maybe I don't need to talk to you about anything else.
And that's a whole other can
of
worms.
That's a whole different conversation, because, you know, in the gay community, we just, oh, that's my good girlfriend, that's my good boyfriend. But sometimes it's hard for us to kind of break it because, you know, we're just so afraid of being alone. So.
Absolutely. So with that, thank you, Daddy Rod. Let's move into talking about loss and grief, because I think that, again, a lot of these are real, like, strange bedfellows, because, you know, all of these things kind of dwell in this, you know, kind of derive from similar places. And like we said, when we're talking about this year, you know, nothing about losing someone or experiencing a death is easy. It's never easy. But I think especially now, because there's been so much of it, because of everything that's happened since March, and the ways that it's hit a lot of our families, our friends, our coworkers, and just at large. Sometimes it may not even be somebody like that I know, but just turning on the news or seeing something about someone else at the wrong time, it just kind of hits hard. So just from a very general standpoint, not even necessarily zeroing in on COVID-19, did anybody have anything that they wanted to share about how they have had to try to navigate those waters of dealing with loss and grief, or just trying to figure your way through it?
You know, I've learned that grief and loss transcends the death of a loved one. You know, I'm 60 years old, and I love to jog, I love to run, but I've lost some of my physical skills. I have asthma bronchitis, so I can't run the way I used to. So I've lost that ability to just go outside and jog like most people do. Like, kind of take it for granted, but because of my age and my health, I've lost that. You know, I've also lost memory. You know, there's things that's happened in my life that I don't remember. I got something called CRS, can't remember shit. You know what I mean? It's terminal.
I was just about to say, I'm like, oh, he got a real condition.
Yeah, it is. It's cultural. But there are things I just can't remember. And that really bothers me sometimes, because when I'm having a conversation with a family member or friend and they bring up something, I don't remember where I was, what I was doing, how I was feeling. So I have that loss. You know, I haven't had a full-time job in quite some time. I've lost income. You know, so my money is funny. I got to be more prudent, more flexible, more responsible. So when I think of loss, I don't just think of the loss of the people, because I've lost, you know, my father, cousins, loved ones, friends, but just other types of losses. You know, I had some valuable pictures that were near and dear to my heart, and I lost them. They're gone. I can't find them. I've scoured my apartment more than once, and it had bothered me for a while. You know, I was really grieving the loss of that experience that I can't share, because I would like to share that experience, but because I've lost the pictures, it's just gone. Mm-hmm. You know, so grief and loss, it goes beyond the physical, mm-hmm. you know, or just it goes beyond death, because we tend to think of it in terms of just somebody dying, which is very important, but there's other types of losses as well.
This is very true. Anybody else have anything they want to share?
I would like to say that, you know, even though I haven't lost anyone personally to COVID this year, but I do know a lot of people who have, and you know, I know how it's totally wrecked them, because, you know, who would have thought this virus would be killing people like this? Who would have thought 2020 would be like this? But like last year though, and David know this, I lost like 11 people last year. And I think the peak was when my grandmother passed away, who I took care of for the last like 15 years. So when you watch someone who you love so dearly deteriorate to the point where they couldn't even breathe and are hooked up to machines and stuff, you know, it's heart-wrenching. But at the same time, I guess I delved deep into my spirit, and the fact of just realizing when she did pass away, I saw it as a transition instead of a death.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, physically, she's not here. And I get it. You know, I miss her hugs and her kisses and her love. But her spirit is always with me. And I tell people, you know, depending if you subscribe to a religion, you know, you Christian, Catholicism, whatever. You know, I was raised in a Baptist household, but I don't practice the faith anymore. But I do believe that we do go to another place after we pass away and transition. And I tell people, you know, when you see someone you love who was vibrant and loving, and all of a sudden they can't even walk, they can't even take care of themselves, and they're in so much pain, you kind of want them to just pass on from the physical pain so their spirit can be released. Their soul can be free from all the pain and suffering. So for me, I love on their memories, you know what I'm saying? My family, we tape everything. We have videotapes of family meetings, parties, everything. So I look back at that, just cherish those memories. I have dreams where they're talking to me in my dreams, and you know, sometimes when that grief comes, because it just comes sometimes very spontaneously, just out of the blue,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, and the grief hits you hardcore sometimes, and you're just like, whew. You know, sometimes I'll play, like my grandmother, she loved Richard Smallwood. So if anyone knows gospel music, she loved Richard Smallwood. And I always play her favorite song, and I would just go back in my memory and just think like she would sit in her recliner chair, bob her head, and sing that song. And I would think of those memories, we hold hands and stuff. And that brings me joy. And I look and I think and I say, you know, she's in a better place right now. You know, so, but but at the same time, I realize everyone grieves differently. And what I try to do is just be there for them. Like I said, David knows this. I might not say much, but I was like, I'm just here. If you need me, call me. If I need to come over, I come over. And because I know, you know, for a lot of people, it's difficult, and especially this year. Oh my gosh, it's really unbelievable. And so I just try to be that comforter, you know, that nurturer, as everyone keeps saying I am. and that gives me my joy. So it helps me through my grief too sometimes. You know what I'm saying? So
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Daniel, you have anything you wanted to offer up?
Yeah, I think of the loss of this is a physical loss. I think of the loss of my grandmother who raised me, and how that was such a dark moment in life. You know, she was so many things. She saved me from emotional and verbal and physical abuse. She affirmed me in the best way that she could as a Black queer man. She created a warm, loving, brave, and safe space for me to explore and come into my own. And I thought about like just that absence of her not being there, not being like nothing in particular, just not having access to her, like how I was able to have access to her, and how that really how that hurt, how that really hurt, and how it really really sucked, and how even now it still doesn't feel it doesn't feel good. Like I would love to have my grandmother with me forever, but a way that I was able to reconcile that was really like harnessing in all those good memories that we shared. And then like I realized like she was gone in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense, she's always there. I feel her always continuously there. There'll be moments where like it'll be like the faintest whisper, like it'll be really, really quiet in the room. And it's like, I'm like thinking about something about work or something personal. And it's like either I'm frustrated or I'm trying to figure something out. And it's just like a wind that just kind of like comes by, and I hear that. And it really gives me it really gives me resolve that while she physically is not here, that she and all of my ancestors and elders are still around and are guiding and supporting, and even in some cases protecting me from harm and danger. And so it's really helped me to be able to resolve that, but then it's also helped me to be able to provide support to other friends and companions and associates who have had loved ones who have succumbed to Alzheimer's and dementia, and being able to kind of like share, when they're open to advice, you know, some of the gems that I learned being, you know, my grandmother's caregiver up until she transitioned on. And so that has also helped me deal with the loss, and seeing that like I can impart our experience to others, and hopefully help them be able to find some resolve for their loss and their grief as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. David, did you have anything you wanted to share about any of this?
I think the only thing I would add to what everybody else has said is that I read a book that I should have read a long time ago and just didn't, called Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. And man, that book, I mean, the first chapter or so I was crying, and it's about a guy who was a journalist. He's a sports journalist. He wrote it in 90 or published it in 97, but he had a professor from college that he loved and took an interest in him. And after he graduated, he went about his life and just did his thing. And then he, you know, the professor contracted amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, as they call it, which is progressive and fatal, and there's really not a cure for it. And so he started going back to visit him, and the book basically chronicles their visits, where he would come always on a Tuesday, and they would have, he almost constructs the book in a way where he's going back to class and he's having another semester of learning, and his one-on-one conversations and musings with this former professor. And man, it's the lessons that professor imparted upon him, because I guess he allowed him to audio record it, and that's where he got a lot of the information for the book. But man, there's some really, really good life lessons, and a lot of the stuff that already, you know, like Mark, Rodney, and Daniel have been saying were actually little smidgets in that book that the professor was trying to teach this guy. But I think he was in his upper 30s or early 40s, and he was really focused on career, busy, achieve. And the guy was saying, like, no, slow down, like there's more to it than this. And so it was really a phenomenal book. I remember when I picked it up, I was like, why haven't I read this yet? Because it was a bestseller for a really long time, but I was glad I took the time to read it. And I would encourage anyone who's out there to actually read the book. It's a quick, it's less than 200 pages, but it's really worth it. And you could probably get to it in a day or two if you just sit down and read it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm familiar with the book. I think I have it, and I read part of it, and then I kind of put it down. And, you know, I mean, and again, I watch a lot of TV. So part of the, again, I had the book, but I remember, again, I'm a big Will and Grace fan. So I remember an episode of Will and Grace where they kind of had this Tuesdays with Maury situation where it was one person that they knew, and Grace and Will were kind of realizing that it was kind of like, wait, like, this is, you know, that kind of similar thing. So that's what kind of came to mind. But I agree with you. Parts of that book that I did read years ago were just extremely valuable, I will say. But the one thing that I'm hearing, and I love that we're having this kind of expansive conversation about loss and grief. And Mark, thank you for pointing out, like you said, loss is not always about a physical loss. A lot of times, you know, there's any number of losses that we experience that are like physical, you know, like literal, you know, emotional. And I think the part about the grief is the part that's tricky and it's complicated and it's messy, because we always hear about those 5 stages of grief, and, you know, they put it into 5 stages, but the way that shit plays out, you would think that it was like 200, because, you know, within each one of those motherfuckers got like, you know, 5 or 6, you know, subsets in terms of the ways that it can play out. But the other thing that I love that you all pointed out about this, that I think just makes it very beautiful, Rodney pointed to it, Daniel pointed to it, and I know I can relate to it as well, just from, like you said, from a spiritual standpoint, is this whole piece around spirit. You know what I'm saying? I'm just a firm believer, like Rodney said, I don't practice organized religion, but I have a relationship with God that I had to find and establish on my own. And I'm a firm believer that when we transition from the physical realm, like our spirit lives on. I just firmly believe that. Like Daniel said, there have been people who I have seen in my dreams. I will hear them, I'll feel them in my apartment. You see a picture, you see something, and it's just like, that person is letting you know that, like, I'm still here. And I think that that's a very sacred and beautiful way to try to hold on to whatever it is that was the love, those things that bonded us, and even to try to navigate some of the shit that may have been complicated or that wasn't always pretty or that might have been ugly with a said person, because the only takeaway, the only thing that really matters in the end is the love that you had or whatever it is that you experienced with that person that you felt like was substantial or what have you. So I just think that that's very sacred that we point that out. But the other side of that is, like I said, the ways that grief show up, the way that loss, the way that we deal with all that stuff, especially now in 2020, like you said, I think, David, you said it, everybody's going through shit. And we're not always, a lot of times we don't necessarily have the language to say, okay, well, I'm feeling, I might be bitchy or catty or complicated or combative because I'm going, no, it's not that straight a line. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes if you can get through to it and really sit down and try to unpack what's going on, you might get to that. But, I think, like we said, as long as we can just try to have as much compassion for one another. And even with this, go back to what I said around the whole depression and suicide and loneliness thing. I think if we're trying to be there for people and be supportive, ask somebody what they need from you. Like, just lead with that. Like, okay, is there anything I can do to help? Like, you tell me what you need. And I think every time I'm able to do that for somebody else who couldn't do it for me, it just makes me feel even better, because I know that, like, this is, I'm trying to give somebody what I didn't have. Which will hopefully be able to just pull them back from or at least keep them afloat in that moment. So moving on with this list, I want to just kind of talk a minute about vices and how we cope, how we get through stuff, because I think, this is a very interesting piece of the dynamic around wounds and, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's sex, whether it's, food, or I'm an emotional eater. I think somebody else has said, Rodney, you said something about it. I'm an emotional eater. If I'm going through,
I'm not an emotional eater.
No, I didn't say that you said that, but you mentioned something about if something is going on and you said something about a cobbler or cooking or trying to give them food.
He said he cooked for other people, right?
Thank you.
Well, I'm speaking for myself. Bitch, I'm an emotional eater. I have a bad day. I need a chicken wing. I need something sweet.
Rodney, it sounds like Monty needs you to make him a cobbler. That's what it sounds like to me.
I see.
I won't turn it down, and I'll give you
my clue. Thank you.
I will DM you my address as soon as we're done filming this. But no, I just want to talk about, the ways that we find ourselves kind of navigating, like getting through things in terms of how we cope and, how we move through things. So did anybody have anything to share about vices or, what you find, when you're in those moments, or how you navigate through those things?
I'll start. For me, even through all my depression stuff I went through, I really didn't have any vices. I don't think. I've never done drugs. I don't smoke. I'm not a drinker. How can I say this correctly? I'm not sex addict, but I like to have I have a healthy sex life. Let's put it like that.
Okay.
And but even then, lately, I haven't done much because it's just too many fickle people, and then the drug usage and whole different discussion. But right. For me, my coping mechanism, especially over the last year, has been the gym. And music has always been my true coping. Whenever I'm down, I got music galore. So I was raised in a household of music. I worked at a jazz station for 10 years. I had my own house music show. I've heard international kind of music from all around the world. So I'll find music somewhere to kind of pick up my spirits. And if I need to find music to make me cry, I'll cry. If I need some music, I need to bang the wall, I'm going to listen to that. So I'm going to find something to help me get through whatever emotion I'm going through at that moment. And the gym, again, is like where I get it all connect, the mind, body, and spirit all comes together. And that is like my happy space. So like when COVID hit and the gym was closed for like 2 months, I was going through.
Right.
So when they opened, I was beelining to the gym, and I ain't missed a day since.
So let me ask you this, aside from like music, just putting this out there, I mean, when the gym closed, aside from music, I mean, did you find that you had to find other things to kind of supplement that? And I don't mean to supplement you like building and lifting weights, but I'm talking about to fill that void in terms of what it is that you got from it. I mean, how did you?
I had to improvise. So since the gyms were closed, I went to the park and I ran. I go to the high school facilities and run up the stairs or whatever. And I had my headphones on and I had some music going. And cooking is therapeutic for me. So I was making a lot of cobblers and cakes for people. And plus I was going home a lot to California to visit my parents. So that was like a safe space for me as well. So those three things kept me going. So
Okay, that makes sense. Mark, you have anything you want to add about this? And again, when I talk about vices and coping, this is not about good or bad or, you know, whatever. This is just about how we find ourselves getting through shit. That's really what I'm trying to get at. So,
yeah. Well, three vices that come to mind right away is clothes and food and pornography. And sometimes when I'm not feeling good about myself, I go online and shop for like 2 hours, and I end up with a T-shirt. But I can't get off the screen, you know, because I'm just obsessive and compulsive, you know. And then the food, you know, I try to eat healthy during the day, but at night I'm a rebellious teenager. Brownies, cookies, candies, apple pie, cheesecake, ice cream. I'm a mess.
we have a church over here, but you calling all that off.
Yeah. And then, you know, with the masturbation, you know, I remember telling my doctor, because she asked me, did I have a partner? And I said, no, I don't have a partner, but I masturbate from time to time. She said, masturbation, there's nothing wrong with that. She said, masturbation is a form of self-love. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, wow, I must really love myself a whole lot.
And it's safe.
Yeah. I mean, it is. You know, I mean, if you can't be with the one you love the one you with. You know what I'm saying? So I don't have to give my hand $20 or a sandwich or a pair of Timbs.
Well, Mark, you are on timeout. You are officially on timeout right now.
I mean, but he's not wrong.
I
know. He's telling truths. Yeah.
Well, no.
That's it.
No, okay. Daniel, what about you?
You know, so when COVID first started, there was so much going on, and I wanted to like be able to find like sanctuary, as I want to call it. And so my extended family has like a small little farm not far from where I live, about like an hour. And I found a new love for like farming.
Wow.
And I had grown up on a farm with my grandparents, but like it just was like a renewed love to kind of like wake up and hear the animals, and to milk cows and feed chickens, and you know, just kind of like run through the earth barefoot. It really helped and provided like everything that I needed and more. And so that was like one of the things that reemerged and kind of like replaced maybe some of the things that I initially would do. Mm-hmm. And then also like social connections. I tend sometimes to heavily isolate myself, but I think during this time I've really pushed myself to socially connect in whatever way that looks like. So whether that's virtually or even physically like being in an open space with friends. And that really has helped me like get through not only this time, but I think it's really helped me like be able to heal and deal with other feelings and emotions that I may have. Like we're able to really like talk with one another and support one another. And so like having some type of social connectivity has been really, really important, which is why I've always, I've been saying to individuals that I'm not social distancing, I'm physically distancing, because I'm, even when I'm like, you know, separated, say virtually, I'm still, you know, I'm still being sociable. And I think that for me has also helped me, because instead of saying social distancing and emotionally feeling socially disconnected, I realized that I'm physically distancing, but I'm still socially connected to individuals and things that I love to do. And so really kind of increasing that has helped me as well.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. David, what about you?
Now, I was just going to say that's such an important distinction. I remember we first started talking about that way back then because people were feeling all out of sorts because it's kind of like socially distancing. And I think they just used that phraseology and just fucked it all up.
Right.
And, you know, it was really that you wanted to keep physical distance from people, but that didn't mean you have to emotionally or, you know, any other way, you know, disconnect from people. And so I'm glad Daniel brought that up because I think it's an important distinction. You know, I don't know, for me, you know, my coping mechanisms over the years have ranged from, you know, introversion to, you know, Rodney said, you know, I'm not a sex addict or I'm not addicted to sex. I think the continuum on that is what I've learned to be, that was called sexual compulsion or compulsivity. And so it's a way that you cope with stress or with weighty things by engaging in sex. And that can be either masturbation or sex with other people or random hookups on the apps online or something like that through your phone. And so I think you can do that. And for me personally, I found some of those things, and gambling as well has been a vice that I have, that, you know, when I feel stressed, sometimes I'll drive 2 hours. I mean, and this is where it's good that there's not a casino in Atlanta, because I have to drive like 2 to 3 hours to go to North Carolina or to Alabama to find myself a casino, because otherwise I'd be in trouble. Because there's something soothing for me about being in front of a slot machine and just vegging out. And most people will not understand that, and they'll be like this, like, how is that actually good? But for me, it gets everything away, and then I can just focus on this game and the hope or the dream that you will win something big. It's therapeutic to me for some reason. One of the healthier coping mechanisms I discovered that I liked during COVID was actually walking and being up in the country. It's kind of similar to what Daniel was saying about being on the farm. You know, I'm from Schenectady, New York, which is a smaller to mid-sized town, but my parents lived up in a very small town called Broad Albin on a lake, which is just in the middle of nowhere. And so I would just start walking. And at first I started walking like 2 to 3 miles. And then I built myself up all the way till I did a half marathon over a few months. And I would just keep walking along the streets and as far as I could go. And then I'd decide when I wanted to come back and how I felt. And not only was it good for me physically to get out and experience nature and breathe fresh air instead of being cooped up in the house, but it also, like, I have my headphones on. Sometimes people would call me and just want to talk. And it's rare that you can actually have a moment in these days and times where when someone calls you, that you're not worrying about doing something else, or there's not a text coming through, or there's not an email coming through, or you're worried about that meeting you're going to do, or something else is distracting you. And so it was like just walking along the highway, like my full attention was there. And so whether I was listening to music or whether I was talking to friends, it was really a way to connect more with myself. And I think when we talk about social distancing or physical distancing, like, it's distancing from other people, but this whole COVID-19 pandemic has really had us disconnecting from ourselves on some levels, and then in other levels, reconnecting with ourselves in ways that either we didn't know before or we now had to rediscover ourselves, because we kept hiding behind all these other social things so that we didn't have to get into ourselves. So it's been a blessing on some levels, but those are some of the the mechanisms or things that I use to kind of cope now. Or some of the vices, they can be either destructive or some of them, you know, maybe a little bit more healthy, you choose. And I'm not a judge of, you know, doing a bad one or a good one, because people can judge me on the way I use, and I may oscillate. Sometimes I use things that could hurt me and coping mechanisms that could hurt me. Other times I'll be on the other pendulum and I'll do things that's really healthy. It just depends on my mood and how I'm feeling that day.
Thank you. That's real. And, you know, this is a safe space. We can, you know, again, no judgment in terms of what somebody does. Like, you know, like I said, this is more about us just being, again, just sharing what has worked for us, what we found hasn't worked, and if it didn't work, why? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me be great, Monty. Let me be great.
You be great and walk your marathon and eat your lemon heads, even though that wasn't on camera. He showed up at the beginning of this show with a big old box of lemon heads.
And it's still here.
And still got his box.
And you didn't offer anybody none of your lemon heads, David. Not even one.
But David, that piece that you shared about, and Daniel brought this up too, about the physical distancing versus social distancing, I think is very true, because like you said, I think there is a differentiation there. And, you know, like you said, COVID is kind of, it's forced people to kind of, for some people who were more social, who couldn't sit still or what have you, it's forced them to kind of like have to sit with themselves and be like, okay, so who am I when I'm not around all these people? And then you have people like me who don't like a whole lot of people. You know what I'm saying? Who don't, you know, I'm a loner. I don't fuck with a whole lot of people. I have to deal with the public every day when I was working. You know what I'm saying? I had to deal with the public for 20 years straight, you know, dealing with, you know, people and different attitudes and points of view and people tapping on your shoulder and can you do this or what have you. And it's like, you know, I had to learn over the years that at a certain point, there was a certain line, like there was a boundary I had to draw. And I had to be able to just kind of close off so that I can, like Rodney said, I can listen to my music. If I want to eat, if I want to smoke, you know what I'm saying? Whatever it is that I need to do, or, you know, and again, some of the healthier things, like for me, it's meditation. It's, you know, I burn sage. I burn incense religiously in my apartment. I listen to a lot of music. I watch a lot of television. I don't really watch a lot of reality TV, but I love dramas and comedies and like mindless shit that, you know, I can just watch and just not have to think about. So all of those are things that I've had to learn, you know, how to just be able to do. And just be okay with that. And for me, for somebody like me who does not deal with a whole bunch of people, this forced me to be able to just open up, to be able to just like create a lot more networks with some of my friends that I was already tight with, but we created more of a network in terms of like checking in on each other. Like, even if it's daily, like if I don't hear from certain people each day with just a text message, just to, you know, whether you're having a shitty day or whether you're having a great day or it's just okay. If I don't hear from them, then I know something is up, because it's like we just developed this rapport where it's like, okay, we just check in. If you just laying on the couch chilling, that's that. Or if you got a shit ton of stuff to do, it just almost kind of became like an insurance policy that we had to be able to make sure that we were checking in on each other emotionally. And I think those things are very important. But moving along, and this is the last one on our list that, again, is definitely being impacted and affected by COVID-19, is the whole conversation around disclosure and HIV and AIDS. I mean, and those are two different things, but I know for those of us who are living with HIV or who identify as HIV positive or what have you, who have crossed over to that side, a lot of this in terms of the ways that we had to navigate, you know, disclosing to people or potential sex partners or, you know, somebody that we might potentially like in terms of wanting to date or be more serious with. All of those are things that we had to kind of navigate before. But it just feels like for me, it just feels like an added layer of complication with COVID-19. But while we're on the topic of HIV and AIDS and all those kinds of things, did anybody have anything that they wanted to share about, you know, their experiences around that? And this could be pre-COVID or now, it does not matter.
Yeah, so disclosure is always like it, for me as someone living with HIV, I feel like even now that I'm at the place where like, I'm just like me, disclosure is always disclosing my status. There's always that moment of like, this is like a weird space because you're having to be vulnerable and transparent. And it's like, I'm having to trust you with like this intimate detail about me. And so in my mind, I have just learned that like the individuals that I need to have connections with and who need to be around me, like it'll resonate with them and they'll understand. And the individuals who don't, then like that's completely fine. And then it has been easier that I've been a lot more, because I'm a lot more publicly open about my status. It's just been easier to tell folks to Google me. Just Google me.
How about it?
You need to know. But as far as COVID-19 is related, like I can't help but think of like the similarities. And I remember like writing a piece about like the danger of like this archaic thought of like criminalization of COVID-19, and learning from like the horrible mistakes that our nation has done when it comes to the criminalization of like HIV, right? Like, let's be clear, criminalization of COVID is not scientifically going to reduce like the transmission rates at all. It's the same thing with HIV. Like criminalization of HIV has not reduced the transmission rates of HIV.
Counterproductive.
Right, exactly. It's very much counterproductive because what you do is you stigmatize now a condition, and then that shies individuals away from, you know, doing things in order to find out what's going on. So like we see that with HIV, where individuals are not wanting to know their status, because then if they are living with HIV, then they're having to go through this whole process when it comes to disclosure. And then even in the sense of disclosing, that's still not protecting them against, you know, being apprehended, being charged and being sentenced. And we know that many of the criminalization laws in our nation disproportionately affect Black and Brown people, right? And so I can't help but think of like COVID-19 and like how that's similar, like how there's that similar track, and how it's so important that we learn from like our nation learned from the mistake that we made previously, and really try to move forward in making it less stigmatizing, really putting our resources into accessibility and utilization of testing and comprehensive healthcare for all. And so, yeah, that's all that really honestly came to my mind when you were saying that.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to share while we're on this?
I do, because you know, disclosure is very layered and complex and nuanced. You know, I have all types of relationships, and disclosure is not always the first time I let somebody know. You know, because there are people in my life who I love and care about, but because of their personality and their lifestyle, they don't really have the capacity to be present when I need them. And so, for example, 2 days may go by without me I take Jim Boyer, you know, once a day. 2 days may go by, and I may feel some guilt about it, and I may want to talk to somebody, and I have to know who to talk to, and more importantly, who not to talk to, right? So disclosure, for me, I have to re-examine my motives, you know, my beliefs, my values. Is it the right time? You know, there's so many layers to it. You know, I've been undetectable. My viral has been undetectable for a very long time. So I feel blessed enormously. And yet there have been times where I wanted to have sex with a man and I was afraid of being rejected. So I had to think about, okay, what kind of sex are we going to have that doesn't put you at risk or me at risk? Am I willing to take that risk in that moment? You know what I mean? Should I tell you? How much should I tell you? Is it going to fuck up the mood? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much, because maybe I don't feel like wearing a condom tonight. You know what I mean? So there's just so many layers of disclosure. It's not just I'm HIV positive. Sometimes this is how I feel about myself, or this is where I am with my life, or it's not just this one thing, right? And so there's so many layers that require me to really think about, am I telling the truth, right? Can I wake up in the morning with my dignity and self-respect? Am I going to lose myself for a feeling? Because I can be attracted to you and not be interested in you. But if I'm feeling depressed in that moment, I may want you to hold me. Not sexually, but for the affection. But I can confuse that because of how I'm feeling. So I got more issues than the New York Times. And I've learned how to not take myself morbidly serious. You know, I am humanly fallible. I'm going to fall short. I'm going to make mistakes, right? But I've learned to forgive myself for being myself. So even when I don't disclose, as long as I'm not causing harm to me or you, I can be okay with myself.
Ashe. Thank you for sharing that. Daddy Rod, anything you want to share about this?
I guess for me, the disclosure is really not an issue now because, like Daniel said, just Google me. I've done so many workshops where I've talked about myself being HIV positive and how it deals with when I talk about BDSM and leather activities. So people kind of already know. Now, when I found out 20 years ago, that was a different story because, you know, back in 2000, we were, I guess, about 10 to 12 years in the throes of HIV. So the stigma was strong and you had the birth of the internet. So I'm dating myself. So you had like AOL chat lines, Yahoo Messenger, Black Planet, and you didn't put that out there like that because you still had Black people who thought this is a gay white man's disease. And then if they didn't think that, they felt like, well, this is a punishment for you being gay. So you didn't really put yourself out there like that. So when I found out, and I credit my friend David, he kind of helped me through it because he helped me get with the right doctors, whatever. And then there was a support group at the time that was founded by Richard Anderson, rest in peace, he created a support group for people who are HIV positive, who are affected and infected with HIV. So I met men at that time who may have been HIV positive going on 5-10 years. So to see them and them still thriving, even though some of them were still struggling, but they were alive and they had so much hope, that gave me hope. And then as I got more comfortable getting into the leather community and I became more, I guess, sexually aware and started doing these classes, and it was just comfortable. I was just comfortable just talking about my status. So that was, after a while, it was just like, okay, y'all know I'm HIV positive, so that if y'all gonna come out like, I can't believe you didn't tell me, I was like, bitch, Google me. You've been to my workshops, you've seen this and everything, like you see my blogs. I'm like, what the fuck? Right. So I wasn't really tripping. Now the stigma is not as strong as it was back then because there's still that stigma, because I'm pretty sure for those who are on apps and stuff like that, I'm no longer on that crap anymore. Like Jacked and Grind, all that shit. But you know, when people say, well, are you clean? So I'm like, at first for the longest time, I was like, yeah, I shower. What are you talking about? I was just like, what are you talking about? Then I found out that was meaning, are you clean being HIV negative? I'm like, that's ignorant and stupid. Why don't you just ask me? You know what I'm saying? So that stigma, unfortunately, is still going on. But, you know, that's a whole different conversation. But but with COVID, if you want to tie that in with COVID now, I guess there's some people who are trying to equate COVID with HIV I mean, I'm like, baby, that's totally two separate things. Like with HIV, we know that's sexually transmitted or through needles or whatever like that. Right. COVID, I can cough on you, you can probably catch that shit. I was like, so I said, this is totally different. Let's not even try that. But I think what's bad about it, what you could say, I think, unfortunately, with the great advancement in therapy for HIV, you know, that some people become a little bit kind of careless with their sex, just like what they had with COVID. Like, depending on where you live, like I'm from California, so in California, you have to wear a mask everywhere where you go. Georgia, it's, quote, not required, but suggested. Recommended. Recommended. So a lot of people don't do it. So I'm like, why would you not wear a mask knowing you can easily catch this shit? So then you got these brothers, amazingly, if you're on Twitter, you see this all the time.
The memes, yeah.
Well, I'm not even talking about the meme, but I'm talking about just recklessly having sex with all of these people. and you
Oh,
don't even know if they got COVID or not. So it kind of took me back to even when the advancement of HIV medication started coming, made it better. So people are like, oh, I can just go to all these sex parties and all this and just still do whatever. And I'm like, no, babes. So it's something, I tell you. It's again, that's a whole other conversation in itself, but it's just bad. And I'm just like, again, luckily I have not lost anyone personally to COVID, but I feel that's going to change soon because some of my good buddies, they little freaks, they little hoes, and they just go into these sex parties, the bookstores, the parks, and I'm just like, I'm not sure, I'm sure they're not asking, like, are you COVID negative? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's a sad situation. So
and that's
I was going to say, I think there's parallels. So I think what Daniel was saying is true. I think there are parallels with HIV. And I remember when people started first making comparisons, I was like, nah, it's not the same. But then as you start to peel away the layers, it is very interesting. And I remember I've had a close friend die of COVID. He was only 40 years old. He wasn't HIV positive, but he was overweight and had high blood pressure, and I think he may have had diabetes, which are the conditions that's associated with people who are likely to, to transition or pass if they contract COVID-19. But I remember a good friend of mine was feeling some kind of way. He was like having a little bit of shortness of breath, and he was afraid to talk to anybody about it. And he called me and he was like, should I go get seen? And he was having a little bit of trouble breathing. And he was overweight as well. And I said, dude, go get checked out. Just get the COVID test. Make sure everything's okay. Turns out his test was positive. And then he didn't tell anyone in his family. And I remember asking him, I said, well, why didn't you tell anybody? Like, why were you afraid? He said, because I felt like they would shame me, like I had done something wrong to deserve this. And he was like, and that's where the parallel really, that's where it hits the road for me. That's where it brought it home for me, because he said, David, I wore a mask every time. I took care. I had hand sanitizer. I was doing this. I wasn't spending a lot of time in a lot of crowds. I wasn't going to restaurants. I wasn't doing all this stuff. And I still got it. And he was like, I was afraid that people were going to be like, well, what'd you do to get it? And that's the same thing with HIV. When someone gets HIV, they're always going to be like, what did you do? Were you doing this, that, and the other? And I think we have to, and particularly when we talk about, what Rodney was discussing with sexuality and being sexual with HIV, we have to avoid perpetuating some of that stigma against people who are wanting to be sexual during a pandemic. And the New York City Department of Health had a fucking amazing list of recommendations of, how to be sexual during a pandemic. And it started with like Mark was saying, start with yourself. Like, you could jack off all the time. That's your safest partner. But they also gave caveats and said, look, if you're going to be with someone else, here's what you can do. And I thought that was wonderful, because I think it's a hard ask for people. As human beings, we're sexual people. We want to fuck. We want to be connected. And if you take all this disconnection with all our identities, all our social identities, being Black, being same gender loving, living with HIV or not living with HIV, we're already fragmented and disconnected as it is. And that drives us to connect with people in sexual ways and or not using condoms, because there's that level of contact and intimacy that we crave with somebody else. But New York City Department of Health did a really good job with that. They even went as far as recommending that people could go to glory holes, because it was never proven that this novel coronavirus was being shed in semen or was transmitted through oral sex. So they said, well, hey, if somebody just sticks their dick in a hole and you going down on him, you're not going to give him COVID. He's not going to give you COVID. So go ahead and do that. And so I thought there was a way to do that. And I'm also very clear that people are adults and people are grown. And so it's a decisional balance. You're weighing the potential risks and benefits, and everybody is a little bit different. So if someone says, you know what, this is, again, like Daniel was saying, it's a parallel with HIV. Someone will size somebody up and say, you know what, I don't think they're living with HIV. I'm gonna go ahead and not use a condom. And we make that decision based on really frivolous things, like whether they're little gym bunny and they have a lot of muscles. So you're pursuing the equations in your head are, Well, they have a lot of muscles, so therefore they're probably a top. They're probably really masculine. And tops don't get HIV as much as bottoms do, so that's going to be a risk. I'll be okay with him. It turns out he's actually the biggest bottom on the face of this planet, and he's also versatile. And so he got HIV from bottoming, or he may have got it from topping, because some tops can get HIV. It's a lower risk than bottoming, but it can transmit HIV. And I think people make that balance, and they do the same thing with COVID. Well, I'm not going to kiss you, or I'll wear a mask, or I'm just going to come in and you're going to be ass up lubed, and I'm going to fuck you, and then I'm going to leave, or I'm going to use this glory hole. And I think we need to give space for people to explore and enjoy and experience pleasure with their sexuality, even during a time of pandemic, and especially, I would argue, during a time of pandemic, because that's going to heighten our need to connect with people, and that comes across in sexual ways. So I try not to be too judgmental of people who are out there, enjoying themselves and living their best life, just as long as they're, kind of understanding that if they're kissing somebody, or if they're swapping other kind of oral secretion, or if they're in close proximity with somebody. But different people are finding out very interesting and nuanced ways to wear masks, put the GIMP uniform on with the leather mask over with the zipper, doing whatever you do, get your inner freak on, explore some new things you were not used to before, and enjoy yourself. And kind of, it's harm reduction. It's harm reduction. Yeah, because it's not
all these masks and stuff. I tell people,
you can do it, but I think we're at the point where it's actually harm reduction. Yeah. And like Daniel said, like I think Rodney said as well, it's not about criminalizing people who put themselves or others at risk of COVID-19. It's a harm reduction strategy, whether it be people going back to schools, or people going outside to the beach, or people going to a casino or to a restaurant. It's harm reduction at this point. What can we do to kind of reduce the risk? Because humans are going to be humans. We need to be humans. So let us be humans, but teach us the ways to protect ourselves and let us decide. And I think that's kind of the point we're at right now.
Wow, thank you for that, David. And I love that you added all of that, because it does bring it around to making it like present and topical in terms of all, like you said, all of the things that we're experiencing, and something that Rodney spoke about. And my reasons for even adding HIV and AIDS and disclosure to this list, it wasn't necessarily because of COVID-19. I put COVID-19 there at the bottom when I was really forming this in my head a couple months ago, because I felt like that's the biggest fucking wound that we all are kind of dealing with. And sadly, like I said, all of these things kind of bleed into them. But some of the things that Rodney spoke about, and like that Daniel spoke about, I think for me, HIV became one more thing that made me feel unworthy. You know what I'm saying? It was one more reason for somebody to reject me. So, for me to feel like nobody's ever going to love me, that I'm not good enough. And then like Daniel said, and like Rod said, after a certain point, when I started Brave Soul Collective almost 15 years ago, slowly it became easier, because it was like, my nigga, I'm out here talking about it all the time. So like, this is a part of my toolkit. So if I've met plenty of other guys that didn't know who the fuck I was, because I'm not a celebrity. I'm just somebody who's an artist and out here, doing my thing. But when it became easier, and I was able to kind of weed people out and be like, okay, you know what? If they're for me, then they're for me. But if not, like, I'm not finna sit here and because I've had people try to treat me like the consolation prize. It's like I tell them and everything's all, it's like I think everything's all good. And then slowly after that, they say they're cool with it. And then slowly the communication begins to taper off, or it's kind of like, oh, well, we can just jack off, or we can just do whatever. And I'm like, dog, I'm not going to sit here and make apologies about this part of my life or my being, because I don't deserve that. But I had to get to that point. And then the reason that I did want to bring it into this conversation around COVID-19 is because the flip side has kind of happened. Me being 15 years into living with HIV, being undetectable, and not even being concerned about passing on HIV to somebody because I'm in treatment and I take my meds. If anything, I have to get tested for STDs and everything else, STDs and STIs, to make sure that I'm good on that. So that I'm not putting anybody at risk, and so that I'm not, letting somebody else put me at risk. Come on.
I like that.
Make me cry.
Wow, where'd you get that from?
Those are okay, you're not gonna make me Oprah ugly cry on this video.
I have never let go of this shirt. This is Brave Soul Collective, Timim and Monty. did this years ago, and I thought it was the most beautiful shirt I had ever seen.
Wow.
And I bought it back in the day and have not gotten rid of it.
Wow.
Just
David,
so you know, Monty.
No, I appreciate. I don't even think I have any of those shirts anymore. So when you showed that, I'm like, wait, what is? Yeah, but no, I mean, we wanted to put together something that was about, it was about us being able to embrace each other, and even like the image that you see, it's like one hand reaching out for another. Because it's like
two brave souls.
Yeah, because it's like, listen, we cannot get through this shit alone. And I said this before, as much as I don't fuck with people and as much as I don't like human beings in general, when I feel safe, I don't. I'm saying it. But when I feel safe with somebody, and I think it doubles back to what you said at the beginning when I asked that leading question about how do you navigate letting people in, I gotta trust you. I have to trust you and I have to feel safe enough to open myself up. And once I do that, this is what you get. But I've also learned in 45 years, you got to navigate, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody's not cut out to be able to handle that capacity. And everybody doesn't have your best interests at heart. So it's been a tricky, it's just been like a slippery slope. But that whole thing around HIV and AIDS and disclosure is very challenging. And for me, like Rodney said, for me, if anything, if something comes up around somebody I want to have sex with or whatever, the conversation about HIV can come up. But I'm asking my own questions like, okay, so have you been traveling? You been on a flight? Like I got my whole other battery of questions, and again, I'm not stigmatizing them, but again, I'm trying to gather information so that like, if we are going to lay down and freak and do whatever, like I need to find out where you've been. Because if you've been on a plane and at a kickback and at this party and here and there and you work and dog. Like, we are just going to chill on this until I can know that, because I don't need one more thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't need nothing else complicating my health or my life. Everything is good and I want to keep it that way. So I think all of these are just very necessary and complicated conversations. But I think that this has been a wonderful way to kind of dive into all of this for Act 2 for Wounds. Again,
Monty,
yes.
Do you ask, have you been to a Trump rally? Baby, if I gotta have those questions, then we ain't got no, we not fucking. That I don't no, I don't care how fat your ass is. No, no, I'm good. But no, I really appreciate you all just being so transparent and just offering all of this up, because I think that, like I said at the onset, all of these things that we talked about, they were all things and very real and relevant and present for all of us prior to COVID-19, but since March and for the foreseeable future, because we don't know how long this shit is going to last. Like we really have to be mindful of these things. And I think if anything, like David said, it puts it on everybody's radar so that we can look at harm reduction, so that we can look at how we can still live and, and experience enjoyment, whether that's physical or emotional or mental or what have you, because this is like something that has kind of become like a thief of joy in a lot of ways. And we just got to find whatever ways we can to try to maintain that. And I really feel like, a lot of these things that we're talking about are, these are some of the best ways that we can just try to unpack all of that shit so that we can be as functional and as, just as functional and just, I don't know the word I'm looking for, just able to live and experience some kind of enjoyment, because I think so many people have just experienced a lot of just challenges around isolation and just, not, like you said, that lack of connection, which is just very, very important.
Monty.
So, yes.
Okay, David, do me a favor. Lift that shirt up, please. Up more, baby. Thank you. Monty, this is your assignment. Recreate that shirt and sell it. And I'm dead serious. You laughing, but I'm fucking serious. That is a beautiful shirt. And what's going on right now, that shirt will sell. So that is your assignment.
Well, you know what?
Shush. Get that print. Do that shirt.
David Barnes.
Yes.
David Barnes.
Yeah, he drew. I kind of gave him an idea, and he came back with that, and I was like, "Yo, this is dope."
That is a powerful shirt, and it needs to be put out.
It always, I will say this, it always draws a crowd and some comments.
Exactly.
When you wear it. Always.
And it reminds me of Joseph Bean, who said that black men loving each other is a revolutionary act.
Exactly.
And that was one of the catalysts for us starting this years ago. That was definitely a catalyst.
And we need that more than ever now.
Absolutely.
So create that shirt again.
Well, I heard, no, the only thing I was going to say when you shushed me was, no, next year is, yes. No, Rodney, next year is our, 2021 is year 15 for us.
Stop. So you got to think business now, babes. You're entering the Christmas season.
Oh, you want me
ready to buy stuff.
Fair enough. Touche.
As an entrepreneur, I'm thinking business, babe.
You give me this
Get
finger.
that print out, put it on my Shopify. Let me buy that stuff.
All right, y'all. I have been charged.
How's he doing it again?
Daddy Rod has
charged me. Going on there.
He has given me my mission. But no, with that, the last thing I want to make sure that we do, because we want to highlight one particular organization specifically, I want to speak into the space, and it's going to come up on this slide. And we'll also, at the end of this video, you'll see a list. You also see this list, and we'll link the website. But BEAM, they're out of LA. It's the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. And all of the work that they are doing around Black people and mental health is just fucking amazing. It is amazing because it's work that's affirming of queer people, non-binary, transgender individuals, just everybody, but it's about Black people in terms of, people being able, Black folks being able to get what they need in terms of our mental and emotional health, which we all know is an area that, a lot that is, it gets overlooked a lot of times. So we definitely want to highlight BEAM, and, from this graphic here, like I said, we'll flash that graphic and we'll make sure we link the website, but we want to encourage him to go check out their website. It's just basically beam.community. And definitely check them out. They have some great resources and some more things that you'll see from this graphic at the end. But
today is Yolo's birthday too.
Yes, happy
October
birthday. Yes, Yolo Akili, who works with BEAM. We want to make sure we
isn't he the founder of BEAM?
He's the founder.
We
speak them up definitely. Yeah, so with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And I think, again, I know David answered the question, but just if you had to come up with something, just knee-jerk reaction, other than the word trust, how have you had to navigate letting people in? Does anybody else have anything else that they think they can offer up to somebody about if you have challenges with letting somebody in or being able to ask for help in some of these situations? What would you recommend? Anybody?
I would just say be brave. It's gonna take it takes in you being brave to take that first step to letting individuals in. So being brave.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel.
Discretion.
Okay.
Empathy is really important.
Empathy
is very important.
Okay.
Empathy, tolerance, understanding, patience, kindness, respect.
Okay. And I think I think all of those are things in combination, like David said, with trust. And the biggest thing for me is just always, again, I have to be mindful of what I feel like I didn't get in those moments. And that's how I'm able to just when I get shit that people say to me that's not helpful, I'm kind of like, okay, but what would have been helpful? And I try to think about those things in terms of situations like that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just, being able to just, like you said, discernment, and, just being able to just try to stay open, and just being able to articulate what it is that you need. I think when you put it out there, it's a risk. It's being vulnerable, but I think that's the thing that saves us a lot of times. I know it saved me because I got pride, and I think I have, I won't say I have it all together, but it's a risk to be able to let somebody in and let someone know where you're compromised, especially emotionally, and sometimes that could be financially or whatever it is. But I think I'm a firm believer, like I said, that we always get what we need when we need it. I'm a firm believer in angels, and I know they show up in my life all the fucking time. So I'm just grateful for all of that. And in that spirit, I mean, you know, I consider all four of y'all angels because, you know, y'all know I love you, and I'm just very grateful for your presence in my life. Mark, you're the new guy on the block who I just met, you know, within the last couple of months, but I'm glad that we crossed paths. And Daniel, you know, I'm grateful, you know, just for all of the work that you do, and just being somebody who's just very open and just loving and affirming. And David and Daddy Rod, I have known for years. You know, a lot of times when I would come to Atlanta with me and Tim M and all these other people when we started Brave Soul Collective, you know, that was how, yeah, we gave him, you know, we had shirts. I think that was the first year when we did something at Pride in Atlanta in 2000. I think that was 2006, 2007 when we first did Pride. And I remember, Dave, I don't know if you remember this. You picked me and Tim M up from the airport. Mm-hmm. And that was when I first heard Foreign Exchange, because you was blasting the Connected album in the car. And I was like, I was doing my mean, nasty Mary J. Blige bop, because I was like, oh, this is. But I remember shit like that. So it's just, you know, like, you know, I remember, you know, first meeting you, and then, you know, when I found out that you and Keith Green, who's going to be one of our panelists next month or in December. Keith is going to join us for the panel in December when we talk about healing. And Daddy Rod, you know, we go way, way back. And I'm just grateful for each and every one of you for trusting me and just for offering up your insight. I don't take that for granted. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. But to everybody else, we want to just thank you for tuning in for all of this. We encourage you to check out the written pieces that you'll see at the bottom of the screen. We have some from a few of our contributing writers. And then we have some great performances that you'll see just to the left of this on your computer screen. We have some great performances that not only speak about HIV and some dating things and, you know, what it means to be Black and queer. They also speak about aging and a lot of other things as well. So we got some things that definitely tie into everything that we talked about tonight. So we encourage you to check that out. And definitely, most importantly, we ask you to all definitely just join us on December 6th when we finish out this 3-part series with healing, which is the most important part of it, because we talked about the roots back in September. Now we're in the wounds, and we want to talk about how to treat the wound. You know, as I always say, you got to rip the Band-Aid off and treat the wound. And that's the most important part of it to me, is the healing and how we wrap this up. So in December, we're going to be a little bit lighter, and hopefully we'll, you know, be able to insert some more humor, even though I think we found some great ways to, you know, keep it real and keep the humor in it tonight, which was great. But on behalf of all of my Black Men Feel contributors, I just want to thank each and every one of you who pass along the information, who share it on social media, who RSVP, who donate and contribute. And we definitely want to give a special shout out to our brothers at CNP, Counter Narrative Project. We want to shout out Charles Stevens, the executive director and creator of CNP. We want to shout out the creative director, Johnny Cornegay III. Definitely check out Revolutionary Health and all the other things that CNP has going on. They are a partner with this, and we would not have been able to do this without them. And yeah, so we will be back in December. Everybody, please get out, and I'm gonna let David rep his shirt. So we all have on Black Men Feel t-shirts except for David. I told him I wanted him to keep that shirt on. So go on and rep your shirt, because this is what we want y'all to do. Definitely get out and vote. Please get out and vote. Make sure you do that.
Bringing it back to Diddy in 2004, George Bush versus John Kerry. Vote or die.
Yes, because there's a lot at stake, and y'all know, so we ain't got to say no more than that. But just please get out and vote. Please be safe. Go vote early if you can. And if you're in the trenches, wear your mask. Just be safe. And we are sending you all lots of love. And we hope that you got something from this. Like I said, we definitely will offer up more support resources and some things from Beam and some other websites and some things of that nature. So until we see you again in December, have a great November and a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you to round this out in December. And yeah, so with that, we're going to say good night. Mark Tuggle, Daniel J. Downer, David Milbranch, and Daddy Rod, thank you all, gentlemen. And for that, we're going to say good night. And
everyone.
We'll see you on the flip side, okay?
Bye.
Night. Later.